My name is William Carter. I'm 72 years old. I've worked hard all my life. I spent decades in the construction business, eventually starting my own small company. Over time, I grew it, earned good money, and built a respectable reputation. But the greatest luxury money ever gave me wasn't the houses or the cars. It was the ability to be with my family. When my wife, Margaret, was alive, our home was always warm, full of laughter and life. But when I lost her, that same house became as silent as a graveyard. I could have lived there alone. I had the means to pay the bills, cook my meals, and take care of myself. But loneliness is something you can't buy your way out of. And the older you get, the heavier that silence becomes. That's why I asked my son, Daniel, would it be okay if I stayed with you and your family for a while? He smiled and said, "Of course, Dad. Your family." I believed his sincerity. Daniel's wife, Claire, was polite at first. She greeted me with a smile, offered me tea, and made small talk. But her eyes told a different story. Cold glances, forced politeness. She rarely looked at me directly at the dinner table. And sometimes, from the kitchen, I'd overhear her voice, sharp and irritated. "If your father is going to be here all the time, what happens to our privacy?" Daniel would try to calm her down, but each time her tone grew colder. I told myself, she'll get used to me. I tried not to be a burden. I helped around the house, assisted my grandson, Ethan, with his schoolwork, and even started a small vegetable patch in their backyard. But no matter what I did, Claire's eyes never softened. One afternoon, after lunch, Claire came to me. Her voice was like ice. "William, we need to talk." "Of course, Claire. What's on your mind?" "I think it's time you stopped living here. This is our home and you're disturbing our peace." I felt a knot in my throat. I had come here only to be close to my family, but her words made me feel like an intruder. I didn't argue. Daniel was at work that day. When he came home, Claire told him what she'd said. He didn't defend me. He didn't disagree either. And sometimes, silence is heavier than words. 2 days later, Daniel sat me down. "Dad, maybe staying at a retirement home would be better for you. You'd have people your age around, professional care." I knew exactly what this was, a polite way of saying, "Go." So I agreed. I didn't want to fight. Most of my belongings were still at my old house anyway. I took a suitcase with a few clothes and photographs and left. The first night at the retirement home, I stared out the small window and thought, so this is where I've ended up. Claire's words echoed in my mind. This is our home and you're disturbing our peace. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't helpless. I had millions in my accounts. I had sold my company, invested wisely, and I could live anywhere I wanted. But I'd kept my wealth a secret, not out of distrust, but because I wanted to see who truly valued me for who I was, not for what I had. Life in the retirement home was quiet and predictable. Breakfast, a bit of conversation, lunch, television in the evenings. Bland, repetitive, until one person made it bearable. My grandson, Ethan. Ethan wasn't Claire's son. He was Daniel's child from his first marriage. His mother lived out of state, so I'd helped raise him when he was little. And unlike his father, Ethan still saw me not as a burden, but as family. Ethan would visit me every Saturday without fail. Sometimes he brought me books, other times just his company. He was only 15, but he had a maturity far beyond his years. One afternoon, he showed up looking more upset than usual. "Grandpa, are you okay here?" he asked. "I'm fine, Ethan. Don't worry about me." "No, I mean, you don't belong here. You belong at home." I could see the frustration in his eyes. I didn't want to put the weight of my situation on his young shoulders, but he already knew more than I thought. Over the next few weeks, Ethan started noticing things. He'd hear Claire's dismissive comments when he visited his dad's house. He'd see Daniel avoiding the topic of me altogether. And then one day, fate put something extraordinary in his hands. A set of documents in his father's study. They were property deeds. My property deeds. Signed away under the authority of a power of attorney. The very one I'd given Daniel years ago to help sell an old car. I'd trusted him with limited authority, never realizing he'd abused it to sell almost everything I owned. Ethan didn't understand the full legal weight of what he'd found, but he understood one thing. This was wrong. Very wrong. He came to me the next day, the papers folded in his backpack. "Grandpa, you need to see this." As I read through them, my hands trembled, not out of weakness, but out of controlled anger. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft wrapped in the signature I had trusted him with. Ethan looked at me with determination. "We can do something about this. I know a lawyer." Well, his dad is a lawyer. He might help us. I realized then that this boy, my grandson, was the only one in the family who still understood what loyalty and integrity meant. We met with the lawyer, a sharp-minded man named Peter Lawson. Ethan did most of the explaining at first. Peter's expression hardened as he read through the papers. "This is fraud, Mr. Carter. Abuse of a power of attorney. We can challenge this in court. And with the timeline of events, we might even have grounds for criminal charges." That was the first time in months I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. Ethan visited me more often after that, updating me on the progress. The lawyer was building a case, gathering records, even tracing where the money from the sales had gone. Daniel had hidden it well, investing through intermediaries, but paper trails don't lie. Meanwhile, I made sure Ethan knew that no matter what happened, doing the right thing was worth more than money. I told him about my own youth, how I'd started with nothing but a willingness to work hard, and how character mattered more than possessions. He listened, not just hearing my words, but absorbing them. One rainy afternoon, Ethan asked me, "Grandpa, if we win, what will you do? Will you take everything back?" I smiled. "Maybe, but more importantly, I'll make sure the right people end up with it." Peter worked quickly. He filed the necessary motions to freeze any assets connected to the fraudulent transactions. And within 2 weeks, a judge approved a temporary injunction. Daniel wouldn't be able to sell or transfer anything until the case was resolved. When the notice reached him, Daniel stormed into the nursing home one evening, red-faced and furious. "What the hell are you doing, Dad?" he spat. I didn't flinch. "Just cleaning up a mess you made. You think you can win against me?" "I don't need to win against you, Daniel. I just need the truth to come out." His eyes darted toward Ethan, who stood beside me. "So this is your doing, huh?" he sneered. Ethan didn't back down. "It's your own doing, Dad. You stole from him, and now you're angry we caught you." Daniel left without another word, but I could tell his mind was racing. He'd underestimated both of us. Over the next few months, the case unfolded. Peter uncovered a chain of bank transfers that led to an offshore account under a shell corporation. And then came the bombshell. One of the intermediaries Daniel used had turned state's evidence in another fraud case and was willing to testify about Daniel's involvement. At the same time, Ethan's loyalty never wavered. He'd come to court with me, sit quietly through the proceedings, and afterward we'd talk about what it all meant. I could see the pride in his eyes. Not pride in the money we were fighting for, but pride in standing up for what was right. The trial was grueling. Daniel's attorney tried every trick in the book, claiming I'd given him verbal consent, painting me as forgetful, even hinting that I wasn't mentally competent at the time. But Peter was ready for them. He presented medical records, witness statements, and the original limited power of attorney that proved Daniel had no right to do what he'd done. In the end, the judge's ruling was clear. Every transaction Daniel had made under that power of attorney was null and void. All assets were to be returned to me, along with damages for the income I'd lost. Daniel sat there, staring at the floor. He'd lost. Outside the courthouse, Ethan looked at me. So, what now? I put my hand on his shoulder. Now, I make good on my promise. Within weeks, I had moved out of the nursing home and into a modest but comfortable house, one that Ethan picked. I transferred a significant portion of my assets into a trust in his name, enough to cover any university he wanted, and more. I even surprised him with a car, not a flashy one, but reliable, something to carry him into his future. "Grandpa, I don't know what to say," he murmured when I handed him the keys. "Say nothing. Just live your life with integrity. That's worth more than anything else I can give you." Daniel didn't show his face again. Maybe he was too ashamed, or maybe he simply couldn't stand the fact that the boy he'd raised had chosen his grandfather's values over his own greed. Either way, I didn't care. What mattered was that Ethan had proven something I'd always believed. Family isn't defined by blood alone, but by loyalty, respect, and doing what's right when it's hardest. And as I watched him drive away that evening, I knew the future was in good hands. After the court's initial ruling, Daniel didn't simply disappear. 3 weeks later, Peter called me into his office. His face was serious. "William, Daniel has filed an appeal." I wasn't surprised. Of course he has. Men like him can't stand losing. What's his angle? He's claiming procedural errors, and he's trying to introduce new evidence to suggest you had agreed to the sales in exchange for him covering your medical expenses. I laughed bitterly. Medical expenses? The man didn't even visit me when I was recovering from pneumonia. Peter nodded. "We'll fight it, but it means more delays, more legal fees." Ethan was there when I got home from the meeting. He had skipped a school event to wait for me. "Grandpa, I heard about the appeal. What can I do?" "Keep being who you are. That's already more than enough." But Ethan wasn't satisfied with enough. Over the next month, he took it upon himself to dig deeper. He started talking to people who had known Daniel over the years, old business partners, neighbors, even a former employee who had quit after catching Daniel falsifying documents. He collected names, dates, and details, then quietly passed them to Peter. One evening, Peter called me, sounding almost amused. "Your grandson is relentless. Half the leads we're following now came from him." I smiled. That's because he understands something Daniel never did. Truth is a weapon, and it works best when you're patient. The appeal hearing came and went. This time, the judges were even harsher on Daniel. Not only was his new evidence dismissed as irrelevant, but they also ordered him to cover all water costs for both trials. He walked out of that courtroom looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in a day. But the real closure came a year later. Ethan had turned 18 and was about to start university. I called him over one afternoon. When he arrived, I handed him a sealed envelope. Open it. Inside was a deed to my old family farm, fully restored and renovated. Grandpa, is this? It's yours now. This is where I learned the value of honest work, where I learned to fix what's broken. And I want you to have it, so you'll always remember what really matters. Ethan stood there in silence, the weight of it sinking in. Then he hugged me, tight, the way you do when words aren't enough. Over the years, he visited often, even as he built his own career. He became a lawyer, not because I pushed him, but because he wanted to defend people who couldn't defend themselves, the way Peter had defended me. Daniel never reconciled with either of us. Last I heard, he'd moved to another state, working a job far beneath what he once had. That was his choice. I didn't need revenge to feel whole. I had something better, the knowledge that my values had survived in Ethan. That was my real legacy.